At my sister Madison's rehearsal dinner, she pulled me into a dim, empty hallway, looked straight at my 7-year-old daughter, and told me to take her home because she was ruining the aesthetic for her wealthy new in-laws. What she did next was cruel, but what my own mother demanded of me in front of everyone left the groom's entire family absolutely speechless. Before I get into the rest of this story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever had to cut off toxic family just to protect your own peace, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, because trust me, this story only gets worse from here. My name is Kelsey. I'm 33 years old and I'm a single mother to the most beautiful little girl in the world, my daughter Emma. For years, I played the role I was assigned in this family, the quiet, dependable older sister who never made waves, while Madison, who is 29, basked in the warm, uninterrupted glow of being the golden child. Whatever Madison wanted, Madison got. Whatever Madison broke, someone else quietly cleaned up. That had been the unspoken rule of our household for as long as I could remember. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a night where all of that old history could finally just sit quietly in the background. We had just arrived at the rehearsal dinner for Madison's wedding. The venue itself was breathtaking, a country club with vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a pristine, perfectly manicured golf course. Every detail of the evening had clearly been engineered for one purpose: to impress the family of her fiancé, Trey. Trey is a brilliant, highly successful African-American venture capitalist, the kind of man who built something real from almost nothing. His family is old money, educated, sophisticated, and deeply rooted in a legacy of quiet excellence that goes back generations. They carry themselves with an effortless grace that no amount of money can actually buy, the kind of ease that only comes from never having had to prove anything to anyone. Madison, on the other hand, was desperate to prove she belonged in their world. She had spent the entire engagement obsessing over optics, endlessly trying to mold our messy, imperfect family into a picture-perfect dynasty that we, frankly, were never going to be. I held Emma's small hand as we walked into the grand foyer together. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement, buzzing with the kind of joy only a 7-year-old can feel. She had been talking about being Aunt Madison's flower girl for 6 straight months, counting down the days on a little paper calendar taped inside her closet door. For tonight, I had bought Emma a breathtaking custom-made silk dress. It was a soft blush pink, with delicate hand-stitched lace running along the hem. It cost a small fortune, more than I probably should have spent, but seeing the pure, unfiltered joy on my little girl's face when she spun around in front of the mirror made every single penny worth it. She looked like an absolute princess, and for one shining moment, none of the old family tension mattered at all. We had barely stepped foot onto the polished hardwood floor of the reception area when Madison spotted us from across the room. She was wearing a sleek, white designer cocktail dress, a glass of champagne balanced in one hand. The moment her eyes landed on Emma, her practiced, camera-ready smile vanished instantly, replaced by something colder. She practically sprinted across the room toward us, grabbing my arm with a grip tight enough to leave a bruise by morning. She didn't say hello. She didn't compliment her own niece, standing right there in a dress she'd been excited about for months. Instead, she yanked me toward a dim, secluded hallway near the restrooms, dragging me away from the elegant, low murmur of Trey's family mingling nearby. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic, unstable mix of panic and rage. I looked at her, completely baffled by the intensity of it. "We're here for the rehearsal dinner, Madison. Emma has to practice her walk down the aisle." Madison rolled her eyes and let out a harsh, bitter little laugh, the kind that had no real humor in it at all. "Are you kidding me right now, Kelsey? Emma isn't the flower girl anymore. I changed it this morning." My heart stopped cold in my chest. I looked down at Emma, whose bright, hopeful smile was already fading fast as she registered the sharpness in her aunt's voice, even without fully understanding the words. "What do you mean you changed it?" I asked, keeping my own voice dangerously low and controlled. "I replaced her with Bella," Madison said casually, taking a slow sip of her champagne as if we were simply discussing the weather outside. "Bella is the 7-year-old daughter of Trey's boss. Having her in the wedding party is a huge networking opportunity for Trey. It makes us look good. Emma is just, well, you know." "I don't know. Say it," I challenged her, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Madison leaned in close, her perfume suffocatingly sweet in the narrow hallway. "Trey's family is elite, Kelsey. They expect a certain aesthetic, a certain caliber of people around them. Having the child of a single mother who scrapes by planning cheap birthday parties walk down that aisle is not the look I'm going for. Emma is baggage. You need to take her and leave before Trey's parents even see you here. You're ruining the whole aesthetic of my evening." I felt a physical ache spread through my chest, not for myself, but entirely for my daughter. I looked down. Emma's bottom lip was quivering. Big, heavy tears welled up in her innocent eyes, and she grabbed my leg, trying to hide her beautiful custom dress behind the fabric of my coat, as if the dress itself had somehow done something wrong. She understood exactly what was happening, even if she couldn't have explained it in words. She was being discarded because, in her aunt's eyes, she simply wasn't good enough. Any normal person would have screamed. Any normal person would have thrown that glass of champagne right into Madison's perfectly contoured face without a second thought. But I am not a reactive person. Not anymore. I have spent an entire lifetime absorbing the small and large cruelties of this family, slowly building a fortress around my emotions, brick by brick, year by year. I knelt down right there in the dim hallway and wiped a tear from Emma's cheek with my thumb. I kissed her forehead gently, telling her, in a whisper only she could hear, that she was the most beautiful girl in the entire world, no matter what anyone else said tonight. When I finally stood back up, I did not yell. I looked my sister dead in the eyes with an icy composure that actually made her take a small step backward, as if my calm was somehow more frightening than any outburst could have been. I was fully prepared to turn around, walk straight out that door, and remove my daughter from these toxic people forever. But before I could take a single step, my phone buzzed inside my purse, setting off a chain of events that would end up destroying Madison's perfect facade entirely, right down to the foundation. I guided Emma away from the bustling reception area and into the quiet sanctuary of the country club's coat room. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us, muffling the sounds of clinking crystal and polite, performative laughter drifting from the main hall. Emma was trembling, clutching the blush-pink fabric of her skirt in her small fists like it was the only solid thing left in the room. I knelt down on the plush carpet in front of her, pulling a tissue from my clutch. I wiped her damp cheeks slowly and smoothed her hair back from her face. "You did nothing wrong, my sweet girl," I told her, keeping my voice steady and reassuring, even though inside I was anything but calm. "Aunt Madison is just confused right now. You are perfect, and this dress belongs to you, and only you." Emma sniffled, nodding slowly as I pulled her into a tight hug. That was exactly when my phone vibrated again in my hand. I glanced down at the screen. The text was from my mother, Barbara. "Meet me on the porch right now." I felt a familiar knot tighten hard in my stomach. At 62 years old, my mother had perfected the art of silent, commanding authority. She had never viewed our family as people, not really, but as chess pieces meant to serve her ultimate goal of social climbing. Madison marrying Trey was, in her mind, her crowning achievement, the payoff of decades of careful positioning. I told Emma to sit quietly on the velvet bench and play a game on my phone for a few minutes while I stepped out. I walked through the side door onto the wraparound stone porch. The chill of the evening air hit my bare shoulders immediately, but the coldness radiating off my mother was somehow much sharper than the night itself. Barbara stood near the edge of the patio, bathed in the dim, flickering glow of a wrought iron lantern. She wore a tailored emerald gown, her posture rigid as a steel rod, her expression entirely devoid of any maternal warmth whatsoever. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "What do you want, Mother?" I asked, keeping a careful, deliberate distance between us. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking softly together. "Madison is in tears inside," she began, her tone already thick with accusation. "You are deliberately making this difficult, Kelsey. Why on earth did you bring the child here when Madison clearly told you she was no longer in the wedding party?" "I bought this custom dress for my daughter months ago," I replied, my voice deliberately devoid of emotion. "We were invited to the rehearsal. I am not hiding my child away like some dirty secret just because Madison wants to suck up to Trey's boss." My mother narrowed her eyes, stepping closer, her heels clicking against the stone. "Do not use that tone with me," she snapped. "Trey's boss is a very important man. His daughter Bella needs to walk down that aisle tomorrow. It's crucial for Trey's career, and by extension, Madison's entire future." I stared at her, almost unable to believe what I was hearing. "Trey is a millionaire venture capitalist, Mother. He does not need a 7-year-old flower girl to secure his career. This is Madison being cruel, plain and simple, and you enabling her the way you always do." Barbara waved her hand, dismissing my logic completely, as if I hadn't spoken at all. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that Bella is slightly taller than Emma. Madison already called a private tailor who agreed to do an emergency overnight alteration. Bring Emma out here right now. Take off the dress and hand it to me. I need to get it to the tailor before midnight." I actually laughed, a harsh, hollow sound that surprised even me. "You want me to strip my crying 7-year-old daughter out of her dress in a coat room so you can hand it off to some stranger's child? I paid for this dress with my own money. The answer is absolutely not." Barbara's face hardened into a mask of pure malice. "You will do exactly as I say, Kelsey, or I will walk right back into that dining room and have a very loud, very public conversation with Trey's mother. I know exactly how much you care about what his family thinks of you." I stood my ground, refusing to give her even an inch. "Go ahead. Tell them whatever you want. They already know Madison is neurotic." My mother smiled, a cold, reptilian smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, I won't be talking about Madison at all. I'll be talking about you. I will tell Trey's esteemed, highly educated parents all about your juvenile detention record. I will make absolutely sure everyone in that room knows you are a criminal who spent a full year locked up in a youth facility. Let's see how Trey's mother, the honorable appellate judge, reacts to having trash sitting at her dinner table. She will have you thrown out by security before dessert is even served." The air between us grew impossibly heavy. She was using the single darkest chapter of my entire life as a weapon against me, dusting it off like it was nothing more than a bargaining chip. The record she was threatening to expose was real, undeniably real, but the crime attached to it was never mine. I felt the phantom weight of handcuffs settle on my wrists, a memory from 15 years ago that I had buried as deep as I possibly could. I had taken the fall for a hit-and run that Madison committed while she was underage and driving under the influence. My mother had literally begged me on her knees to take the blame, insisting that Madison had a bright future ahead of her and that I, apparently, had nothing left to lose. I had sacrificed my own reputation, my own future, to save my sister from prison. And now my own mother was standing here, weaponizing that ultimate sacrifice, simply to steal a dress off my daughter's back. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, quietly measuring the sheer, staggering magnitude of her betrayal. She stood there triumphant, fully believing she had cornered me at last. She thought I was still that broken, obedient teenager who would throw herself under the bus all over again just to keep the family peace intact. She thought the shame of my past would paralyze me completely, forcing me to hand over my daughter's dignity without another word of protest. She was completely, utterly wrong. The girl she manipulated all those years ago no longer existed. In her place, I had built a life of ironclad resilience, one brick at a time. And I was done, entirely done, protecting either of them at my own expense. I looked at my mother, and instead of cowering the way she expected, I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a sharp, calculated one, the kind that made Barbara falter for just a split second. She had expected tears. She had expected a frantic, groveling apology, or maybe even a total mental breakdown right there on the porch. She certainly did not expect me to calmly reach into my designer clutch and pull out my phone instead. My thumb hovered over the screen as I opened a secure cloud storage folder. "You think you're the only one who remembers the past, Mother?" I asked softly, my voice barely rising above the rustle of wind through the oak trees overhead. "You think I spent the last 15 years building my life without taking out a little insurance policy against this family?" I tapped a file labeled November 12th. The audio was crisp, digitally remastered, and perfectly preserved after all these years. I turned the volume all the way up, holding the speaker steady in the space between us. Out of the tiny speaker came my sister Madison's voice, hysterical, sobbing, piercing straight through the quiet night air. "Oh my God, Kelsey, please, you have to help me. I hit something. I was drinking and I hit a parked car and I drove away. If the police find out, I'll lose my college scholarship. My life will be over. Please, Kelsey, you have to say you were driving. Mom said you should do it because you're not going to a real university anyway. Please, Kelsey, take the blame for me." I pressed pause. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Barbara's face drained of every last drop of color. The smug, triumphant mask she'd been wearing just moments earlier shattered completely, revealing the terrified, suddenly much older woman underneath. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. She stared at my phone as if it were a live grenade, primed and ready to detonate and obliterate her entire social standing in one single blast. "Where did you get that?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling with genuine, unmistakable fear. "I kept the voicemail, Mother. I saved it on a hard drive and backed it up to 3 different private servers, years ago. I knew a day would come when you or Madison would try to use my own sacrifice as a weapon against me. And now, here we are." I took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look me directly in the eye. "Let me make this crystal clear. If you or Madison so much as look at Emma's dress again, I will not just play this recording for Trey's mother privately. I will connect my phone to the country club's Bluetooth system and broadcast Madison's hit-and-run confession over the main dining room speakers for every single guest to hear. I will let Trey and his entire family of esteemed lawyers and judges hear exactly what kind of person he is marrying tomorrow morning." Barbara swallowed hard, taking a stumbling step backward until her shoulders hit the cold stone pillar of the porch. "You wouldn't," she gasped, her hands visibly shaking now. "It would ruin everything. Trey would call off the entire wedding." "Try me," I whispered. "Push me one more time and watch exactly what happens." She was paralyzed. The immense power she had always believed she held over me had vanished into thin air right in front of her, and she knew it instantly. There was no negotiation left, and no further threats to be made. The psychological game she had played for decades was, as of that moment, officially over. "Do not ever threaten me with the crimes your golden child committed," I said, my voice steady and cold as the night air around us. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mother. I turned my back on her and walked away, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone patio. I did not look back once. When I re-entered the coat room, Emma was exactly where I'd left her, swinging her little legs against the velvet bench. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and questioning. "Are we staying, Mommy?" she asked softly. "No, sweetheart," I said, offering her a genuine, warm smile, the first honest smile I'd managed all night. "We're going home. The food here is terrible anyway. How about we go get some double chocolate ice cream instead?" Emma's face lit up immediately, all the earlier tears forgotten in an instant. She hopped off the bench, grabbing my hand tightly in hers. We walked right past the double-glass doors of the dining room, where Madison was busy laughing falsely and clinging to Trey's arm, playing the part of the perfect future wife for an audience that had no idea what had just happened 30 feet away. We walked past the valet, out into the crisp evening air, and got into my car. As I drove away from the country club, I felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of liberation wash over me. The heavy chains of guilt and obligation I had carried for 15 years had finally snapped. I had fired the first warning shot, and my enemy was left completely, utterly defenseless. But I knew Madison. I knew her entitlement, her greed, and her total, breathtaking lack of self-awareness. She was not going to let this go gracefully, not even close. And tomorrow, on the morning of her $1 million wedding, she would make a fatal mistake, one that would end up costing her absolutely everything she thought she had secured. Inside the grand dining room, the atmosphere remained a stark, glittering contrast to the cold reality unfolding out on the porch. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over tables adorned with imported white orchids. Waiters in pristine uniforms glided seamlessly across the floor, pouring expensive vintage wines into glasses that never seemed to run empty. At the head table sat Trey. At 34 years old, Trey was a man who commanded a room without ever needing to raise his voice above a normal conversational tone. He had built his venture capital firm from the ground up, relying on sharp instincts and an unwavering moral compass that had guided every decision he'd ever made in business. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the sophisticated visionary his colleagues and competitors already knew him to be. Now, though, his sharp eyes were scanning the room with a different kind of focus. He had seen me walk toward the coat room earlier with Emma, and he'd noticed that we hadn't returned. He had also noticed his future mother-in-law, Barbara, slipping back into the room a few moments ago, looking unusually pale and visibly agitated, nothing like her usual composed self. Trey turned to Madison, who had taken her seat beside him again. She was holding her champagne flute a little too tightly, her knuckles white against the stem. "Where did Kelsey and Emma go?" Trey asked, his concern genuine and immediate. "I thought Emma was supposed to practice her walk with the ring bearer before dessert." Madison let out a heavy, dramatic sigh and set her glass down with exaggerated care. She immediately reached for Trey's hand, intertwining her fingers with his, playing the exhausted peacemaker role to perfection. "Oh, babe, don't even worry about it," she said, shaking her head with feigned sadness. "Kelsey left. She threw a massive tantrum in the hallway and just stormed out." Trey frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together in genuine confusion. "A tantrum?" he repeated slowly. "That doesn't sound like Kelsey at all. Is she okay? Was Emma crying?" Madison leaned closer, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a painful, deeply personal family secret. "You know how she gets, Trey. She saw the floral arrangements and the menu, and she just snapped. She started complaining about how much money we're spending on the wedding, and how unfair it is that she has to struggle while I get this whole fairy tale. She said she couldn't stand to be here another minute and dragged Emma out with her. It's just pure jealousy, honestly." I tried to calm her down, but she was completely irrational about the whole thing. Trey processed this information quietly, saying nothing for a long moment. His entire business was built on reading people accurately and assessing risk before it became a real problem. He had only interacted with me a dozen times or so, but he had always found me to be grounded, practical, and deeply devoted to my daughter above all else. The image of me throwing a jealous fit over flower arrangements simply did not line up with the woman he thought he knew. He looked at Madison, studying the slight tremor in her hands and the subtly defensive posture she'd adopted without seeming to notice it herself. Sitting directly across from them was Trey's mother, Jacqueline. She was a highly respected appellate judge, known throughout her professional circles for her piercing intellect and her uncanny ability to see through deception in a courtroom. She wore an elegant sapphire silk dress, her posture immaculate as always. She had been quietly sipping her sparkling water throughout dinner, but she had caught every single word of Madison's story, missing nothing. Jacqueline did not say a word. She did not raise an eyebrow, nor did she offer any kind of judgmental sigh. Instead, she simply observed, the way she'd trained herself to do for decades on the bench. She watched the way Madison carefully avoided Trey's direct gaze at key moments, and the way Barbara, sitting at the adjacent table, was currently gulping down a glass of Merlot like she'd just seen a ghost walk through the room. Jacqueline possessed a masterclass level of emotional intelligence, honed over a long career, and her silence in that moment spoke absolute volumes. She mentally cataloged every inconsistency she noticed, filing each one away, all while keeping her sophisticated composure perfectly intact. Trey gently pulled his hand away from Madison's grasp, using the guise of reaching for his water glass to cover the movement. He felt a sudden, inexplicable unease settle over him. His entire family valued integrity above almost everything else in life. They were people who believed that wealth was a tool meant to uplift others, never a weapon to be wielded for social status. If what Madison had just told him was true, it was disappointing on a personal level. But if she was lying, it was something far, far worse than mere disappointment. "Excuse me for just a moment," Trey said, offering Madison a polite but noticeably distant smile. "I need to check on something with the coordinator." He stood up from the table and walked out into the quiet hallway alone. He pulled his phone from his inner jacket pocket. He didn't want to pry into things that weren't his business, but his conscience simply would not allow him to ignore the strange feeling settling in his chest. He opened my contact and typed out a brief, carefully worded message. "Hey, Kelsey, I noticed you and Emma left early. Madison said you weren't feeling well. Just wanted to make sure you two got home safely and that everything is okay. Let me know if you need anything." He hit send, sliding the phone back into his pocket. It was a simple, polite text on the surface, nothing dramatic about it at all, but it was the exact lifeline needed to unravel the entire web of lies that had been building around him all evening. I saw Trey's message light up my screen just as I was tucking Emma into her own bed, safely far away from the country club drama. I chose not to reply right away. Some truths, I've learned, require the harsh, unfiltered light of day to be fully understood and properly absorbed. The sun rose the next morning, bringing with it the dawn of Madison's wedding day. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping softly outside my window, a strange, peaceful contrast to the storm I already knew was brewing across town. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, quietly enjoying a few minutes of calm before the day inevitably took over. My phone sat face down on the marble counter, deliberately ignored. At exactly 8 in the morning, it vibrated. I flipped it over and saw Trey's name flashing across the caller ID. I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee, bracing myself internally. I swiped right and answered, keeping my voice light, easy, and professional. "Good morning, Trey," I said. "Kelsey," he replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion, clearly a man who hadn't slept much. "I'm sorry to call you so early on the morning of the wedding, but I honestly didn't know what else to do. Madison has been awake all night, crying hysterically." I kept my tone perfectly, deliberately neutral. "Is that so? What exactly is she crying about today, Trey?" He let out a frustrated sigh. "She told me that you cornered her last night and threatened to ruin the wedding. She claims you said you were going to use your industry connections to cancel the food delivery, out of pure spite. She's been having a complete meltdown, saying you're trying to destroy our entire day. Kelsey, I know you were upset about Emma being removed from the wedding party, and honestly, I understand why. I wasn't happy about how Madison handled that situation either. But threatening the catering feels extreme, even for a family disagreement. I just want to hear your side of the story before I make any assumptions." I listened carefully to his words, watching the picture come together in my mind, Madison painting herself as the victim before the storm even fully broke. She was preemptively framing me for a disaster she already knew was coming her way. It was a classic manipulation tactic, one I'd seen from her 100 times before. If the wedding fell apart, she wanted Trey to believe, instinctively and immediately, that it was my fault, not hers. A weaker version of myself might have defended herself frantically, launching into a long, emotional tirade to set the record straight. But I knew better than that by now. Over-explaining only makes you look guilty to a man who relies entirely on facts to make his decisions. I set my coffee mug down carefully on the counter. "Trey, I really appreciate you calling me directly instead of just taking her word as absolute truth," I began, my voice calm and steady throughout. "I love my sister, but she has a very active imagination whenever she feels like she's losing control of a narrative. I haven't called any caterers, and I have absolutely no intention of ruining your wedding day in any way. I respect you and your family far too much to ever orchestrate a scene like that." There was a brief, telling pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the relief in his breathing before he even said a word. "Thank you, Kelsey," he said softly. "I really didn't want to believe you'd do something so vindictive, but I had to ask." "I'm not vindictive, Trey," I replied evenly. "But since we're already on the subject of the venue and the catering, I do think there's something you need to handle yourself today, personally." "What exactly do you mean by that?" he asked, the confusion returning sharply to his voice. "I'm not going to drag you into family gossip or point fingers at anyone," I said carefully, measuring every single word before I let it leave my mouth. "I'll simply say this. As a venture capitalist, your entire career has been built on due diligence and verifying financial integrity before you commit to anything. I'd highly suggest you apply those exact same skills today. Before you put on your tuxedo, I strongly recommend you personally verify the venue payment receipts Madison gave you. Call the financial director of the estate directly yourself. Don't ask Madison to do it for you." The silence that followed was heavy, sharp, and absolutely loaded with implication. I could practically hear the gears turning in his brilliant analytical mind on the other end of the call. Trey was no fool, not by a long shot. He understood exactly what my words implied almost immediately. I wasn't attacking Madison emotionally or even directly. I was simply pointing him toward a verifiable financial discrepancy and letting him draw his own conclusions. "Are you telling me there's a problem with the venue deposit?" he asked, his entire tone shifting in an instant from exhausted groom to sharp, focused businessman. "I'm telling you to verify the receipts, Trey," I repeated softly, one more time for emphasis. "I'll see you at the venue later today. Take care of yourself." I ended the call before he could ask another question, giving him the space to sit with what I'd already told him. I knew, with total certainty, that I had just planted a seed of doubt Madison would never be able to fully uproot again. By giving Trey the agency to uncover the truth entirely on his own, I ensured he would eventually see through her lies with absolute, undeniable clarity, and that it would be his own discovery, not an accusation from me. I walked into my closet and pulled out a stunning emerald dress. It was time to head to the beautiful estate and quietly watch the entire fake facade finally crumble to the ground, piece by piece. I drove through the massive wrought iron gates of the estate, my tires crunching softly over the immaculate gravel driveway. The property was sprawling, featuring a French chateau-style mansion surrounded by acres of manicured gardens and its own private lake, the kind of setting most people only ever see in magazines. It was, without question, the premier wedding destination in the entire state. What my family did not know, and what I had never bothered to correct, was that I owned every single blade of grass on this property. Lux Group, my company, had quietly purchased it 3 years earlier, long before Madison had even met Trey. I parked my SUV near the service entrance, deliberately avoiding the grand valet line where guests would soon start arriving in droves. I grabbed the mandatory family gift, a crystal vase my mother had insisted I present to Madison before the ceremony began. It felt almost absurd, participating in these hollow little traditions after everything that had already happened, but I needed to maintain the illusion for just a little while longer. I walked through the opulent corridors, heading toward the master bridal suite. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, the noise hit me like a physical wave. The suite was a chaotic blur of white silk, overflowing makeup bags, and discarded champagne bottles scattered across every surface. 6 bridesmaids were lounging on velvet sofas, wearing matching silk robes with their titles embroidered in gold thread across the back. They were exactly the type of women Madison had always gravitated toward: wealthy, superficial, and deeply, quietly insecure underneath the designer labels. Madison was sitting at an ornate vanity, a stylist meticulously pinning her hair into an elaborate updo. She glanced at me through the mirror, her eyes narrowing slightly the moment she caught sight of me. "Well, look who decided to show up." One of the bridesmaids, a tall brunette named Harper, drawled lazily from the couch. She was sipping a mimosa and looking me up and down with obvious disdain. "I thought you'd be too busy organizing some kid's pirate-themed birthday party today, Kelsey." A ripple of cruel laughter echoed through the room. They had all clearly been fed the exact same narrative. Madison had painted me as the tragic older sister, struggling to make ends meet as some low-level freelance party planner living in a tiny apartment somewhere unremarkable. It was a convenient lie, designed to make Madison look far more successful by comparison, and it had clearly worked on this particular audience. I ignored the bait entirely. I walked over to a marble console table and set the crystal vase down carefully. "I'm just here to drop this off from Mother," I said, keeping my tone completely flat and unbothered. Madison turned around in her chair, adjusting her silk robe with a sharp tug. She looked exhausted, the skin beneath her eyes tight despite the heavy layer of expensive concealer someone had clearly applied earlier that morning. "Did Trey call you?" she demanded, her voice suddenly sharp. "He did," I replied honestly, crossing my arms. "He seemed very concerned about the catering." Madison's jaw tightened visibly. "And what exactly did you tell him?" "I told him I have absolutely nothing to do with the catering, Madison. I told him he should verify all the vendor payments himself, just to put his own mind at ease." Her face paled slightly at that, but she quickly masked it with a practiced sneer. "You are so desperate to ruin my day," she hissed, leaning forward. "You're just bitter because you're a single mother who will never have a wedding like this in your entire life. Look around, Kelsey. This suite alone costs more than you make in an entire year." I did look around, slowly, deliberately. I looked at the 3 silver buckets filled with vintage Dom Perignon, chilling on ice. I looked at the crystal bowls overflowing with imported beluga caviar resting nearby. I saw a rack of custom designer robes that Madison had purchased for every one of her bridesmaids, all quietly charged to the venue's master account without a second thought. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her spending was almost impressive, especially considering that none of it was actually her own money. Wow, another bridesmaid chimed in, gesturing toward my simple, elegant dress with a smirk. Is that off the rack? You really should have let Madison buy you something. She's been so generous with the rest of us. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Oh, I'm sure she has been very generous, I said, my eyes meeting Madison's directly in the mirror's reflection. It's incredibly easy to be generous when you're spending someone else's money. Madison flinched, her fingers gripping the arms of her vanity chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Get out, she snapped, pointing a manicured finger toward the door. I don't want your negative energy in here today. You're not a bridesmaid, you're just a guest. Go wait in the lobby with the rest of the nobodies. I didn't move right away. I let the silence stretch out between us, letting my calm presence contrast sharply with her increasingly frantic hostility. You know, Madison, I said softly, finally turning toward the door. For someone who's about to marry a millionaire, you seem incredibly stressed about finances today. I really hope all your checks clear. I stepped out of the suite before she could respond, pulling the heavy mahogany doors shut firmly behind me. The hallway beyond was quiet, a sharp, welcome relief from the toxic echo chamber I'd just left behind. I took a deep breath and checked my watch. It was almost noon. The financial director of the estate was scheduled to run the final audit of the wedding account in less than an hour. The countdown had officially begun, and Madison's lavish, carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse in spectacular fashion. I had barely taken 5 steps down the plush carpeted hallway when a hand violently grabbed my elbow from behind. I turned to see my mother, her face flushed and her eyes darting around frantically to make sure no guests were anywhere nearby. Without a single word of warning, she yanked me backward, threw open a heavy door to my right, and shoved me inside. It was the master walk-in closet attached to the bridal suite. The space was larger than my very first apartment had been, lined with custom cedar shelving and floor-to-ceiling mirrors on every wall. It was currently overflowing with Madison's excessive designer luggage and dozens upon dozens of garment bags hanging in neat, expensive rows. Barbara slammed the door shut behind us and locked it with a decisive click. The sudden quiet inside the closet felt oppressive, thick with the scent of expensive leather and my mother's overpowering floral perfume. She did not waste a single second on pleasantries. She reached into her tailored blazer and pulled out a folded piece of thick legal paper, shoving it aggressively against my chest without warning. "Take a pen and sign this right now," she demanded, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. I stepped back, letting the paper flutter down to the plush carpet between us, refusing to even hold it. "What is that, Mother?" I asked, keeping my arms crossed defensively in front of me. "Pick it up and read it, Kelsey. It's a promissory note for $50,000. We need the money by this afternoon, no later." I stared at her, completely bewildered by the sheer, unbelievable audacity of the demand. I slowly bent down and picked up the document, unfolding it carefully. It was exactly what she'd said. A legally binding loan agreement, listing me, specifically, as the sole borrower. The terms themselves were absolutely predatory, clearly drafted in a hurry by someone who assumed I'd never actually read the fine print. "You want me to take out a $50,000 loan on the morning of Madison's wedding?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm despite the anger building underneath. "For what, exactly?" Barbara paced the narrow stretch of carpet, wringing her hands together anxiously. Madison went slightly over budget on the floral arrangements. She insisted on importing rare white orchids directly from Holland, to match the centerpieces Trey's mother had at her own wedding decades ago. The vendor is demanding the final balance before they'll even set up the reception hall this afternoon. Slightly over budget, I repeated slowly, scanning the ridiculous legal document again. $50,000 is not slightly over budget, Mother. That's a down payment on an actual house. Why doesn't she just ask Trey to cover it himself? He's a millionaire. Surely he can afford a few imported flowers without blinking. My mother stopped pacing abruptly and glared at me as if I were the single stupidest person on the entire planet. Are you out of your mind? Trey cannot find out about this, Kelsey. His family is incredibly strict about financial planning. They value modesty and fiscal responsibility above almost everything else. If he finds out Madison blew through her entire floral budget just to impress his mother, he'll think she's financially reckless. It would humiliate her in front of his entire family on her own wedding day. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly, folding the paper back up as I spoke. My sister wanted to look rich in order to impress her wealthy future in-laws. She spent money she didn't have on flowers she didn't need. And now, to protect her entirely fabricated image, you want me to take on a massive, crippling debt in her place. It is not crippling, Barbara scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. Stop being so dramatic, Kelsey. You're acting like we're asking you to sell an organ. You'll just pay it off in installments over time. It's completely manageable for someone in your position. I looked at her, genuinely repulsed by how easily she expected to gamble away my entire financial future for the sake of appearances. I'm a single mother, I reminded her, my tone hardening with every word. I have Emma to take care of every single day. I have rent and groceries and school fees to think about. How exactly do you expect me to pay this back? My mother let out a cruel, deeply condescending laugh, the kind that made my skin crawl. Oh, please, Kelsey. Let's be realistic here, shall we? You are a single mother with no real prospects to speak of. You live a completely unremarkable life, organizing cheap little parties. You don't have a prestigious career or a wealthy husband. Madison is marrying into the absolute upper echelon of society today. Her success is this entire family's success. When she's officially Trey's wife, she'll take care of us. She will elevate all of us. But right now, in this exact moment, she needs this one favor from you. I stood there, letting her toxic words wash right over me without absorbing a single one of them. She truly, genuinely believed I was worthless, a footnote in Madison's story rather than a person in my own right. You owe your sister this sacrifice, Kelsey, she continued, stepping closer and pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. You ruined her rehearsal dinner last night by walking out and making a scene. You owe her an apology, and you owe her this money. Sign the paper. We'll figure out the payments later, together. As a family. Right now, we just need the vendor to stop threatening to pack up the flowers and leave. I looked down at the promissory note in my hand, feeling the thick, expensive texture of the paper between my fingers. This was not simply a request for money, it was a demand for my total subjugation, plain and simple. She expected me to literally bankrupt myself to buy imported flowers for a sister who had, less than 24 hours earlier, kicked my daughter out of her own wedding party. The delusion was staggering, almost impressive in its scale. I looked back up at my mother, studying the desperate, frantic gleam in her eyes. She thought she had me cornered in this closet. She thought her guilt trip would break my spirit the way it always had before. But she had no idea who she was actually talking to anymore. I maintained steady eye contact with her as I made my decision. I did not crumble under the weight of her psychological warfare. Instead, I carefully aligned the edges of the thick legal paper and folded it cleanly in half. I folded it again, running my thumb along the sharp crease with deliberate slowness. I unclasped my leather handbag. a rare, customized piece crafted by an independent designer in Milan that had cost more than Madison's entire catering deposit combined. To my mother, though, it was just a plain black purse, entirely devoid of the flashy luxury logos she worshipped so openly. I slipped the promissory note inside the silk-lined interior and let the heavy gold clasp snap shut. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the quiet, airless closet, cutting cleanly through the heavy scent of her perfume. "I am not signing that, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady octave. "I am not taking out a crippling loan to fund Madison's vanity project, and I'm certainly not paying a single cent toward these ridiculous imported orchids." Barbara stood paralyzed for a fraction of a second, as if the word itself had physically struck her. She simply could not comprehend the word "no" coming from me. For 33 years, she had operated under the absolute delusion that she held total authority over my life, every decision, every sacrifice. She expected me to bow my head, swallow my pride, and absorb the financial blow, exactly the way I had absorbed every other toxic demand she had ever made of me. The realization that I was flatly rejecting her, that I was refusing to sacrifice my own daughter's security to save Madison from her own reckless greed, triggered something primal and explosive inside her. "How dare you?" she hissed, her face contorting into an ugly, unfamiliar sneer. Her meticulously applied makeup could not hide the sheer vitriol radiating from her features in that moment. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat, I gave you everything." Without another second of warning, she lunged forward, her hands slashed through the air, aiming a vicious, open-palmed slap directly at my face. It was a move she had used frequently when I was a teenager, a physical strike designed to stun and humiliate me into immediate submission. She wanted to physically beat the defiance out of me right there, among the racks of designer garment bags. But I was no longer a scared, defensive teenager, and I hadn't been for a very long time. My reflexes were sharp, honed over years of navigating high-stakes corporate negotiations and dealing with ruthless, aggressive adversaries in the business world. Before her palm could even come close to connecting with my cheek, my left hand shot up. I caught her wrist mid-air. My grip was unyielding, locking her arm firmly in place between us. The sudden physical resistance shocked her completely. She gasped, her eyes widening in absolute disbelief as she tried to yank her arm back and failed. I did not let go. I tightened my grip just enough to let her feel the undeniable shift in the power dynamic between us. "Do not ever raise your hand to me again," I said, staring directly into her panicked eyes without blinking. "Do not touch me, and do not ask me for another dime as long as you live." I stepped forward, invading her space and forcing her to tilt her head back to keep looking at me. "You are so blinded by your obsession with status that you cannot even see what is right in front of you. You have no idea whose house you are standing in, Mother." I released her wrist with a sharp downward motion. She stumbled backward, her shoulder hitting a rack of silk dresses hard enough to send hangers clattering. She stood there clutching her arm, breathing heavily, but instead of absorbing the warning, she retreated instantly into her usual defense mechanism of blistering arrogance. She let out a breathless, mocking laugh, adjusting the lapels of her tailored blazer to regain some semblance of composure. "Whose house I am standing in?" she parroted, her tone dripping with venomous sarcasm. "Listen to yourself, Kelsey. You sound completely delusional. This is the Lux Group estate. It's owned by some massive private conglomerate. It is the most exclusive property in the entire state. Don't act like you have any real power here just because you managed to show up as a guest tonight. You are a nobody, standing in a closet you could never afford to rent, let alone own." She continued her tirade, completely oblivious to the immense, staggering irony of her own words. "If Trey finds out the flowers aren't paid for, it will be on your head," she spat, stepping aggressively toward the door. I will tell him you promised to handle the vendor and backed out at the last minute out of pure jealousy. I will tell everyone that you ruined your own sister's wedding because you're bitter and broke. You think you can just walk away from us? We will see about that." She unlocked the heavy wooden door and pushed it open, storming back into the chaotic bridal suite without so much as a glance behind her. I stood alone in the closet for a moment, taking a slow, calming breath. She had completely missed the literal truth buried inside my statement. She had no idea that I was the CEO of the private conglomerate she had just praised so dismissively. She had no idea that I signed the paychecks for every single employee on this sprawling property, and she certainly had no idea that her frantic threats were about to become completely useless against the avalanche of consequences I was moments away from unleashing. I picked up my bag. The countdown was almost over. I walked out of the closet and made my way down the grand staircase to the main lobby. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed loudly, echoing through the cavernous space with a strange kind of finality. It was exactly 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses and floor wax, but an underlying current of tension was already rapidly building beneath the surface calm. I found a quiet spot near the massive stone fireplace, standing half-concealed behind a towering marble pillar. From there, I had a perfect view of the corridor leading to the bridal suite and the main reception hall. Under normal circumstances, at this point in a wedding timeline, the venue would be operating like a well-oiled machine. Waitstaff should have been polishing silverware. Florists should have been adjusting the final petals on the ceremony arch. But as I watched the grand double doors of the reception hall swing open, the scene unfolding was entirely, dramatically different. Men in black polo shirts were carrying large crates of unarranged flowers back out to their delivery trucks. The catering staff, who had been bustling around the kitchen corridors just moments earlier, were now standing in small clusters, whispering among themselves and untying their aprons one by one. The whole symphony of wedding preparation had ground to a sudden, jarring halt. A woman clutching a silver clipboard sprinted past me. It was Madison's luxury wedding planner, her face flushed red, and her usually perfect bun unraveling at the nape of her neck. She was muttering frantically to herself, completely ignoring the small crowd of bewildered guests who had already begun arriving in the lobby. She was breathing heavily as she tapped urgently at her earpiece, pushing open the doors to the bridal suite without even bothering to knock first. I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked slowly down the corridor, following her path at a distance. I stopped just outside the open doorway of the suite, leaning casually against the frame to watch the inevitable explosion unfold. Madison was standing in the center of the room, her hair only half pinned up, still holding a glass of champagne. "What is going on?" Madison demanded, her voice shrill and cutting. "Why are there men carrying my centerpieces back to the trucks? I saw them from the window." The wedding planner stopped in the middle of the room, looking absolutely terrified. "Madison, I don't know how to tell you this," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "The catering staff has completely stopped prepping the food. The florists are dismantling the ceremony arches out on the lawn as we speak. They're packing everything up." Madison dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending pale liquid splattering across the pristine baseboards. "What are you talking about?" Madison shrieked, her face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "Tell them to stop immediately. The wedding is in 3 hours. Get them back to work right now." "I can't," the wedding planner stammered, backing away slightly from Madison's rising rage. The order didn't come from the vendors themselves. It came directly from the top. "The financial director of the venue just issued a hard freeze on all services for your event." The silence in the room was absolute. The giggling bridesmaids froze in place, mid-conversation. Barbara, who was sitting near the vanity, dropped her makeup brush onto the counter with a soft clatter. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In the luxury event industry, a hard freeze meant exactly one thing: the money was gone. Madison's shock quickly morphed into explosive indignation. A hard freeze? She repeated, her voice vibrating with hysterical anger. That's impossible. I paid the deposit. This is a 5-star estate, not some cheap motel. They cannot just freeze my wedding. I am so sorry, Madison, the planner said, her voice trembling badly now. But the financial director was very clear. He instructed all staff to cease operations immediately, effective this morning. Madison stormed across the room, stepping carelessly over the broken glass without even looking down. I want to speak to the manager right now, she screamed, pointing at the door. Go get whoever is in charge of this place. Do they know who I am marrying today? My fiancé is a multimillionaire. His family is practically royalty in the financial sector. If they ruin my wedding, Trey will buy this entire estate and fire every single person who works here. He will sue them into bankruptcy. She was throwing Trey's wealth around like a weapon, completely oblivious to the fact that his money was exactly what she had already stolen and squandered. She paced violently across the room, threatening to destroy the venue's reputation, demanding the staff bow to her perceived status. She genuinely believed screaming loudly enough would magically fix the financial disaster she herself had created. Her arrogance blinded her completely to the very real legal danger she was already standing in. I stood silently in the doorway, watching her desperate performance unfold. She was loudly demanding to see the manager. She had absolutely no idea she was about to face the actual owner of the estate instead. Before Madison could scream for the manager a second time, the heavy suite doors swung completely open. Standing in the threshold was Mr. Montgomery, the venue's financial director, a tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit with a demeanor carved from solid ice. He did not look flustered by Madison's screaming in the slightest. In fact, he looked utterly indifferent to her tantrum, as though he'd seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. He walked into the room holding a sleek leather folder, his polished shoes making no sound at all on the hardwood floor. I stepped further into the hallway, leaning against the wall where I could see everything unfold, while still remaining out of Madison's immediate line of sight. Are you the manager? Madison demanded, crossing her arms tightly. She tried to project authority, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. You need to get your staff back to work right now. Do you have any idea who I am? Mr. Montgomery stopped a few feet away from her, unhurried. He opened his leather folder slowly, deliberately. I know exactly who you are, Madison, he said, his voice flat and entirely authoritative. And I am not here to negotiate catering. I am here to inform you that your event is officially suspended due to gross financial fraud. The air in the suite seemed to instantly evaporate. Barbara, who had been standing defensively behind Madison, suddenly gripped the back of the vanity chair with both hands. Fraud, Madison echoed, her face losing every last ounce of its color. What are you talking about? I paid you. I gave you the cashier's check personally, 3 days ago. Mr. Montgomery pulled a piece of paper from the folder and held it up between them. You gave us a piece of paper that closely resembled a cashier's check, he corrected her calmly. However, when our accounting department attempted to clear the funds this morning, the bank completely rejected it. The check for $150,000 bounced. It is entirely fraudulent. The account it was drawn from doesn't even hold a fraction of those funds. A collective gasp rippled through the bridesmaids scattered around the room. They began backing away from Madison, almost as if her financial ruin were somehow contagious. Barbara stepped forward, her hands shaking visibly. There must be some mistake, she pleaded, forcing a desperate, artificial smile onto her face. The bank must have made an error. Madison's fiancé is a very wealthy venture capitalist. He provided the funds himself. If Mr. Davis provided the funds, then you should have absolutely no problem executing an immediate wire transfer. Mr. Montgomery replied, completely unfazed by her name-dropping. The policy of this estate is very clear. We require full payment cleared before any event begins. Right now, you have consumed thousands of dollars in room service, champagne, and staff labor hours without paying a single legitimate cent. Madison was shaking now, her breathing shallow and rapid. She looked like she was about to faint on the spot. "I will call the bank," she stammered, reaching blindly for her phone on the vanity. "I will figure this out. Just tell the caterers to start cooking again, please." "No one is cooking anything," Mr. Montgomery stated firmly, snapping the leather folder shut with a decisive sound. "The freeze remains in effect. You have exactly 30 minutes to produce a confirmed wire transfer for the full amount of $150,000, plus a penalty fee for the fraudulent check." "And if I can't get it in 30 minutes?" Madison asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Then I will not only cancel the wedding, but I will immediately call the local authorities," Mr. Montgomery said, his tone completely devoid of sympathy. "Providing a fraudulent cashier's check for 6 figures is a serious crime. We will press charges for theft of services and fraud. You will be escorted off this property by the police." Barbara let out a choked sob. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down on her in full force. The lavish wedding she had bragged about to all her friends for months, the wealthy son-in-law she was relying on for her own social elevation, it was all evaporating right in front of her eyes in a matter of minutes. She looked at Madison, her golden child, with a mixture of absolute panic and dawning horror. Madison dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She stared at the financial director, her perfect aesthetic completely destroyed in an instant. She had backed herself into a corner with absolutely no way out left. She had stolen Trey's money, blown through it on luxury items, and tried to fake her way through the venue payment, hoping she could somehow manipulate him into paying twice after the wedding was already done. Now her lies were exposed, and the threat of a prison sentence was hanging directly over her head. The clock was ticking relentlessly, and she was completely, utterly out of options. She stood frozen, trapped in a luxurious nightmare entirely of her own making, waiting for the final blow to land. Mr. Montgomery did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked out of the suite, his leather folder tucked neatly under his arm, the heavy doors shut behind him, leaving a suffocating silence in their wake. The bridesmaids immediately began whispering among themselves, grabbing their designer purses and edging toward the exit one by one. Nobody wanted to be associated with a bridal party facing imminent police intervention. Madison let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She looked around wildly, her eyes darting across the room until they landed squarely on me, standing quietly by the doorway. In an instant, the panic in her eyes morphed into a predatory kind of desperation. She lunged forward, her heavy silk gown dragging across the floor. Barbara was right behind her, moving with a frantic, manic energy of her own. "Kelsey, you have to fix this," Madison begged, her voice cracking as she grabbed my forearm hard. "You work in this industry. You do event planning. You must know the people who run this place. Call them, pull some strings, tell them you'll handle the logistics or get them an industry discount. Just make them turn the kitchen back on." Barbara nodded vigorously, her fingers digging into my other arm at the same time. "Yes, Kelsey," she pleaded, her tone shifting instantly from the vicious tyrant in the closet to a desperate, weeping mother. "You know how these venues operate, they just want a guarantee. Call your contacts, tell them you'll personally vouch for the payment, put it on your business account, you can write it off as a corporate expense, we will pay you back, I swear it. Just don't let them cancel your sister's wedding." I looked down at their hands, clutching my arms like drowning women clinging to a life raft in open water. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of their request was almost entirely incomprehensible. Less than an hour ago, my own mother had physically tried to strike me in a closet because I refused to buy her imported orchids. Less than 24 hours ago, my sister had looked at my crying 7-year-old daughter and called her baggage to her face. And now, facing the absolute destruction of their own fraudulent scheme, they expected me to magically produce $150,000 to save them both. I gently but firmly peeled their hands off my arms, stepping back to put physical distance between us. "I am not calling anyone," I said, my voice completely flat. "And I am certainly not vouching for a fraudulent cashier's check." Madison's face twisted into an ugly mask of desperation. "Please, Kelsey," she whined, tears finally spilling over her expertly contoured cheeks. "I will do anything. If you just fix this money issue, I will let Emma back into the wedding party. I will tell Bella's parents there was a mix-up. Emma can wear her pink dress and walk right down the aisle in front of me. I will even make sure the photographer gets plenty of pictures of her." She offered it like a grand, benevolent prize, as though restoring my daughter's place in the wedding was a fair trade for saving her from a 6-figure felony. She actually believed, in that moment, that allowing my daughter to walk down an aisle again was a reasonable thing to barter with. The disgust that washed over me was so profound it felt almost physical. "You think you're doing me a favor?" I asked, staring at her with cold, absolute contempt. "You think treating my daughter like a disposable prop is something you can use to barter with me? You discarded Emma because she didn't fit your wealthy aesthetic. And now that your fake wealth has run out, you want to use her as a bargaining chip to save yourself from prison." Madison recoiled as if I had physically slapped her. Barbara stepped forward instead, her voice hardening, returning fully to her true, abusive nature. "This is not the time for your self-righteous lectures, Kelsey. Your sister is in trouble. If Trey finds out about this, the wedding is over. You are going to walk down to that management office right now, and you are going to pay that balance. You are family, and you will do this." "I am not doing anything, Mother," I replied, my tone completely unwavering. "You two created this disaster. You lied. You stole. You wrote a fake check. Now you get to sit here and wait for the consequences to arrive." The finality in my voice pierced straight through their delusion. Madison finally realized I was not going to save her. I was not going to be her human shield anymore. Not this time. The panic in her eyes hardened completely into a vicious, desperate malice. If she was going down, she was going to make absolutely sure someone else took the blame with her. She turned toward the vanity, wiping her tears with terrifying resolve, quietly setting the stage for the biggest mistake of her entire life. The heavy wooden doors of the suite suddenly pushed open, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the room like a fog. Trey stood in the doorway, looking incredibly sharp in his custom-tailored tuxedo. But his expression was dark and visibly unsettled. Standing immediately behind him was his father, Richard. Richard was a formidable presence in his own right, a highly respected corporate attorney who had spent decades dismantling fraudulent executives in federal court. He possessed the same piercing, analytical gaze as his son, but carried the added weight of years of brutal legal experience behind his eyes. They had clearly heard the screaming echoing down the corridor. "What exactly is going on here?" Trey demanded, stepping into the room. His deep voice resonated through the suite, commanding immediate attention from everyone present. "I just walked past the main reception hall and saw a crew of men loading the floral arches back into a delivery truck. The catering manager told me there's a hard freeze on our event. Why is the staff dismantling our wedding, Madison?" The moment Trey spoke, Madison's entire demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. The vicious malice that had just been directed at me vanished completely, replaced instantly by practiced grief. She let out a loud, ragged sob, covering her face with her hands as her shoulders shook violently. She practically threw herself across the room, burying her face into Trey's chest. He instinctively caught her, but his posture remained rigid, his eyes scanning the room for real answers. "It's ruined, Trey," Madison wailed, her voice muffled against his tuxedo jacket. "The whole wedding is ruined, and it's all her fault." She pulled back just enough to point a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. Her eyes were red and brimming with freshly manufactured tears, playing the role of the helpless victim with chilling, practiced perfection. "She stole it," Madison sobbed louder, gripping Trey's lapels as if she might collapse without them. "She took our money, Trey." Trey looked down at Madison, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Stole what, Madison?" he asked, keeping his voice steady but laced with a growing edge of tension. "What money are you even talking about?" "The venue deposit," Madison cried, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "The $150,000 you gave me to secure the estate buyout. I didn't want to bother you with the logistics, so I asked Kelsey to handle the payment. She works in event planning, and she told me she could get us a massive industry discount if I gave her the cashier's check directly. She promised she'd deliver it to the venue's financial director herself." Madison let out another dramatic gasp, wiping a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "But the venue manager just came in here and said the check bounced. They said it was completely fraudulent. Kelsey kept the real money, Trey. She kept it because she's jealous of me, jealous of our whole life together. She deliberately gave them a fake check to humiliate me and destroy our wedding on purpose." I stood there marveling at the sheer audacity of her fabrication, spun on the spot with impressive speed. It was a bold, desperate lie, designed entirely to weaponize Trey's protective instincts against me. She was betting everything on the assumption that a groom would always blindly believe his crying bride over a sister she had spent months quietly painting as a bitter, jealous failure. Barbara immediately stepped forward to corroborate the lie, her face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. "It's true, Trey, important. And this is how she repays us. She stole your money, and now the venue is threatening to call the police on us. You have to do something, Trey." Trey looked at Barbara, and then turned his gaze slowly toward me. The silence in the room was absolute, save for Madison's theatrical sniffling. Trey's eyes were searching mine, looking for the frantic guilt or defensive anger that usually accompanies a thief caught red-handed. But he found nothing of the sort in my expression. I did not raise my voice to scream that they were lying. I simply stood my ground, returning his gaze with an unwavering calm that seemed to momentarily disorient him. Beside him, Richard quietly adjusted his glasses. The seasoned corporate attorney did not look at Madison's tears at all. He looked at me instead, analyzing my complete lack of panic with a lawyer's practiced eye. He knew from decades spent in depositions that innocent people rarely scramble to match a hysterical lie in real time. "Kelsey," Trey spoke, his voice low and tight with restrained emotion. "Is this true? Did you take the payment?" Before I could even answer, the door behind Trey and Richard opened wider. Stepping through the threshold was a man who immediately shifted the entire energetic weight of the room. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, holding a thick leather briefcase in one hand. His expression was completely unreadable, possessing the kind of intimidating calm that only belongs to highly paid legal professionals. This was Attorney Pierce, my lead corporate counsel. I had texted him from the driveway earlier that afternoon, instructing him to meet me at the suite with the physical documentation of Madison's financial fraud. He walked straight past Trey and Richard, completely ignoring Madison, who was still clinging to Trey's lapels and sobbing loudly. He stepped directly to my right side, presenting a united, impenetrable front alongside me. He unclasped his briefcase with a sharp, authoritative click that cut right through the sound of my sister's fake tears. He pulled out a heavy legal folder bound with thick red tabs and held it out toward Trey. "Mr. Davis," Attorney Pierce said, his voice resonant and commanding. "I represent Kelsey, and I can assure you that my client did not steal your money. In fact, She is the only reason the caterers didn't call the local police on your fiancé 3 days ago, when that fraudulent check initially bounced. Trey stared at the heavy folder, but it was his father, Richard, who reacted first. As a seasoned corporate litigator, Richard recognized the subtle markers of elite legal representation instantly. He noted the premium stock paper, the meticulous tab organization, and the absolute, unshakable confidence radiating off Attorney Pierce. Richard reached out and took the folder, his face hardening into an expression of pure professional scrutiny. Madison stopped crying instantly, her theatrical sobs dying in her throat, replaced by a genuine, panicked silence. She looked at Attorney Pierce, and then at me, her eyes widening with the sudden, terrifying realization that she had completely lost control of the narrative in her own hands. "Who is this?" Madison stammered, stepping away from Trey. She tried to sound indignant, but her voice was shaky and hollow now. "Trey, don't listen to them. Kelsey probably hired some amateur actor to come in here and lie for her. She's trying to ruin everything. This is just another one of her pathetic, bitter stunts." Attorney Pierce did not even look at Madison. He kept his focus entirely on Trey and Richard, addressing them with the professional respect they clearly deserved. "My name is Jonathan Pierce," he stated calmly. "I am senior legal counsel for the corporate entity that holds the deed to this estate. I am here in my official capacity to deliver forensic accounting records regarding the venue buyout for this wedding. The documentation in your hands outlines exactly when the fraudulent cashier's check was presented to our financial department and the subsequent banking alerts we received when it failed to clear the verification process." Trey looked deeply confused, his eyes darting between me and the lawyer standing beside me. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "You're senior legal counsel for the estate, but you just said you represent Kelsey. I don't understand what's happening here. Madison said Kelsey was just a freelance event planner trying to get an industry discount. Why would the venue's legal team be representing my future sister-in-law?" Barbara, who had been standing silently in horror, finally found her voice again. She stepped forward, trying to physically block Trey from looking at the documents. "Trey, please," she begged, her voice trembling with poorly concealed panic. "This is all a massive misunderstanding. Kelsey is just trying to cause drama because she's upset about her daughter. Don't read those papers. Let's just go down to the management office and write a new check right now. We can fix this quietly. No need to make a whole scene." Richard ignored Barbara completely. He flipped open the heavy cover of the legal folder, his eyes scanning the first page of the executive summary with practiced speed. The room grew so quiet you could hear the subtle rustle of the thick paper turning between his fingers. Richard's face, usually warm and inviting, became a mask of cold, hard judgment as he read. He was a man who had built his entire career defending ethical business practices, and reading these documents felt, to him, like reading a full confession of absolute moral bankruptcy. He looked up from the folder, his eyes locking onto Madison with a chilling intensity. "These are official bank rejection notices," he said, his voice echoing through the silent suite. "They're certified by the issuing financial institution. This is not a misunderstanding, Barbara. This is a deliberately forged financial instrument." Trey stepped closer to his father, looking over his shoulder at the highlighted banking records himself. The betrayal washing over his face was profound and total. He stared at Madison, the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 3 hours, and saw only a complete stranger looking back at him. The silence in the bridal suite became an almost physical weight, pressing down on everyone still standing there. Trey did not look away from Madison immediately. He held her gaze, watching the frantic, desperate calculations flickering behind her tear-stained eyes. Then he slowly turned his attention fully back to the heavy legal folder in his father's hands. Richard was not merely skimming the pages. He was digesting them with the ruthless efficiency of a man who had spent his entire professional life destroying white-collar criminals in court. He adjusted his glasses, flipping to the second tab of the forensic report. Richard paused, his finger tracing a line of data on the page. He looked up and met Attorney Pierce's eyes directly. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Pierce," Richard said, his voice carrying a quiet but absolute authority. "You represented the primary stakeholders during the Horizon Tech merger last year. You don't handle small claims, and you certainly don't run errands for freelance party planners. The fact that you're standing in this room holding this specific documentation tells me everything I need to know about the severity of the situation." Attorney Pierce offered a single curt nod, acknowledging the professional respect between them. "I do not waste my time on frivolous matters, Richard. The evidence in your hands is comprehensive and indisputable." The air in the room grew even thinner. Barbara, who had been trying to formulate another excuse, suddenly seemed to shrink into herself. Beads of sweat formed along her hairline, ruining her expensive makeup in real time. She looked at Attorney Pierce, taking in his custom suit, his unbothered posture, and the heavy leather briefcase resting calmly at his side. The terrifying reality finally pierced clean through her delusion. I had not come here to argue with them. I had not come here to yell, or cry, or defend myself against their petty insults. I had come armed with actual devastating legal firepower. I had brought a corporate legal heavyweight into what they thought was just another family squabble, and she finally understood they were entirely, hopelessly outmatched. Trey leaned closer to his father, tracing the printed numbers on the bank statements with his own finger. "Look at the timestamps, Dad," Trey said, his voice barely above a whisper, but echoing clearly through the silent room anyway. "She presented this cashier's check to the venue 3 days ago. The bank flagged it as fraudulent 48 hours ago." Trey looked back up at Madison, his expression hardening into something cold and entirely unrecognizable. "You have known for 2 days that the check bounced," he stated flatly. "You knew the venue was going to freeze the event, and instead of coming to me, you waited until I walked into this room, and then you tried to blame your own sister for stealing it." Madison let out a ragged, desperate gasp. She saw the absolute disgust radiating from the man she was trying so hard to manipulate. The polished, wealthy facade she had carefully constructed over months was burning to the ground in real time. Driven by pure panic, she lunged forward, reaching out with both hands, trying to snatch the legal folder right out of Richard's grasp. "Give that to me," she shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of its usual sweet, practiced cadence. "Those are private documents. You have no right to look at them." She did not even get close. Richard was a man who commanded boardrooms full of aggressive executives on a weekly basis. He simply took a half step back and raised his left arm, blocking her advance with a rigid forearm. He did not touch her, but his posture became an impenetrable wall between them. "Do not ever reach for my hands, Madison," Richard warned, his tone dropping to a lethal, gravelly octave. "I am an officer of the court. Attempting to destroy evidence of financial fraud will only guarantee that you leave this estate in handcuffs. Step back immediately." Madison froze, her hands hovering in the air between them. She looked at Richard's cold, unforgiving glare and slowly backed away, stumbling slightly over the heavy hem of her silk wedding dress. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small and incredibly guilty in a room that had, just an hour earlier, been overflowing with champagne and celebration. The remaining bridesmaids, who had been huddled near the vanity this entire time, quietly began slipping out the door one by one, abandoning ship before the legal wreckage could take them down with it too. Richard smoothed the lapel of his jacket and turned the page to the final section of the report. "This is not just a bounced check, Trey," he said, handing the open folder to his son. This is a meticulously documented trail of diversion. Look at the routing numbers. The money you transferred into her account did not go toward this venue at all. Trey took the folder, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked visibly near his ear. He was a brilliant venture capitalist, accustomed to analyzing complex financial portfolios for a living, and what he saw on the page in front of him made his own blood run cold. Reading the simple diverted funds report took him less than 10 seconds to fully absorb. He stared at the pages, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to snap cleanly into place. Trey traced the line indicating the rejected deposit and moved his finger down to the pay section, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The holding company listed on both the rejected check and the fraud alert was Lux Group Incorporated. He read the name aloud, his voice carrying a quiet, genuine confusion. Lux Group, he repeated, looking up from the heavy legal folder. I know this conglomerate. They own premium hospitality real estate all across the eastern seaboard, but I still don't understand how this connects to Kelsey. Why is the senior legal counsel for a massive hospitality conglomerate standing in this bridal suite, defending my future sister-in-law? Attorney Pierce took a calculated step forward, deliberately bridging the physical gap between the legal documents and the staggering reality of the situation. He buttoned his navy blue suit jacket, a small but deliberate movement that commanded the absolute attention of everyone left in the room. He cleared his throat, a sharp, authoritative sound that effectively silenced any remaining murmurs drifting in from the hallway. Richard stood silently beside his son, his sharp eyes darting between me and the lawyer, already piecing together the magnificent truth before it was even spoken aloud. It seems there has been a fundamental misrepresentation of facts regarding my client, Attorney Pierce began, his voice resonating with absolute clarity through the room. Mr. Davis, allow me to formally reintroduce the woman standing before you. Kelsey is not a freelance party planner. She does not organize small neighborhood events, and she certainly does not rely on industry discounts to navigate the luxury market. Pierce paused deliberately, letting the weight of his words settle fully over the room before dropping the final, devastating truth. Kelsey is the founder and chief executive officer of Lux Group. She is the sole majority shareholder of the conglomerate that holds the deed to this entire estate. She owns the catering company that was scheduled to prepare your reception dinner tonight. She owns the high-end floral boutique that sourced the imported orchids your fiancé demanded. This entire property, every building, every manicured garden, and every single vendor contract falls under her direct corporate umbrella. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Trey physically staggered back a half step, his eyes widening in absolute disbelief. He looked down at the printed legal documents in his hands, and then slowly raised his head to look at me directly. The sharp, brilliant venture capitalist had been completely blinded by a carefully calculated family illusion. He realized in a single instant that the woman his bride had mocked as a struggling single mother was actually the wealthiest person in the room, possessing a level of quiet power that demanded profound, immediate respect. Barbara let out a sound that resembled a dying gasp. Her knees buckled slightly, forcing her to grab the edge of the marble vanity to keep from collapsing entirely. The daughter she had spent 33 years belittling, the woman she had relentlessly mocked as a failure with no real prospects, was standing right in front of her as a self-made corporate mogul. The sheer magnitude of her miscalculation was paralyzing. All those times she had bragged about Madison elevating the family while treating me like dirt suddenly reflected back at her, ugly and inescapable. She had just tried to force a multimillionaire to take out a predatory loan to pay for her own daughter's flowers. Attorney Pierce was not finished. He turned his piercing gaze toward Madison, who was trembling so violently that the intricate beading on her wedding dress rattled audibly in the quiet suite. Madison did not just write a bad check to some faceless corporation, Pierce continued, his tone merciless and precise. She attempted to pass a forged financial document directly through her own sister's business. She tried to defraud Kelsey's company while simultaneously demanding Kelsey use her supposed non-existent, low-level connections to fix the mess she'd created. It is a level of financial recklessness and personal betrayal that frankly borders on the pathological. I stepped forward, moving out from the shadow of the doorway and into the center of the room. I looked directly at Trey, offering him the professional respect he genuinely deserved. I kept my identity private because my business is my sanctuary, I told him, my voice steady and completely devoid of arrogance. My family has a long history of financial manipulation. I built Lux Group from the ground up without a single cent of their money, and I refuse to let them turn my life's work into their personal piggy bank. I am deeply sorry that my sister brought this toxicity into your life, Trey, but I could not let her steal your money and use my own estate to facilitate her lies. Trey closed the legal folder with a loud, definitive snap. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel, signaling the absolute end of the trial. He handed the heavy binder back to Attorney Pierce, his hands perfectly steady now. He had all the information he needed on paper. But the betrayal wasn't only about the forged document in the folder. It was about the ultimate destination of the stolen funds themselves. He slowly turned away from the lawyers and looked at Madison instead. She was completely frozen in the center of the room, her expensive white silk gown suddenly looking like a costume she had stolen rather than a dress she had earned. "Where did it go, Madison?" he asked. His voice was not raised, but it shook with a quiet, terrifying fury underneath. "I transferred $150,000 into your personal account 4 weeks ago. If you didn't give it to the venue, where exactly did my money go?" Madison opened her mouth, but only a pathetic wheezing sound escaped. She looked frantically toward her mother for help, but Barbara was staring blankly at the floor, completely paralyzed by her own complicity in all of it. "I can answer that for you, Trey," I said, stepping toward the large marble media console. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "As the owner of this estate, I have full administrative access to the network in this suite." I tapped a few buttons on my screen, bypassing the standard guest login entirely. The massive 75-inch smart television mounted on the wall behind the vanity beeped and flared to life. I cast my screen directly to the display. A high-resolution spreadsheet illuminated the dimly lit room, casting a harsh blue glow across Madison's pale, terrified face. The document was a certified forensic audit compiled by my corporate accounting team, cross-referenced against the bank rejection notices. "Look at the screen, Trey," I instructed, my voice steady and entirely professional. "On the 15th of last month, your wire transfer cleared into Madison's primary checking account. Exactly 12 hours later, she initiated 4 separate outbound transfers. She did not keep a single cent in the designated wedding fund." Trey stepped closer to the television, his eyes scanning the highlighted rows of financial data laid bare on the screen. The first transfer was for $68,000. It went directly to a platinum credit card company. Madison had secretly accumulated a massive mountain of high-interest debt over the past 3 years, trying to maintain the illusion of a wealthy lifestyle. She used your venue deposit to wipe her financial slate clean before she officially married you, but she didn't stop there. I continued scrolling down the spreadsheet. The second transfer was for $35,000, paid to an exclusive luxury travel agency that covered the 2-week, all-expenses-paid bachelorette vacation she took with her bridesmaids to the Maldives. She claimed her friends pitched in to treat her, but she actually funded the entire trip using your stolen money. That's precisely why her friends just sprinted out of this room without a single word. They knew they were complicit in spending fraudulent funds. Richard adjusted his glasses, looking at the remaining balance at the bottom of the screen. "And the rest of it?" he asked, his voice laced with absolute disgust. "Retail therapy," I answered, pointing to a series of transactions at high-end boutiques across the display. She spent the remaining $47,000 on a stash of limited edition designer handbags and luxury shoes. In fact, Trey, if you walk into the master closet right now, you'll find 3 brand new orange designer boxes stacked neatly on the top shelf. She bought them 2 days ago, while she was supposedly crying over the venue contract logistics. Trey stared at the giant screen, the horrifying reality of the deception washing over him in brutal, relentless waves. He was a man who had built his entire life on trust and calculated risk. He had completely trusted the woman standing behind him, and she had played him for an absolute fool. "Why would she do this?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. She knew the venue would demand payment today. She knew the fake check would bounce. What was her actual plan here? "Her plan was to manipulate you, Trey," I said, turning to face him fully. "She was betting everything on your impeccable reputation and your family's desire to avoid a public scandal. She knew that if the venue threatened to cancel the wedding at the very last minute, with all your elite guests already waiting outside, you would pull out your own checkbook and pay the balance on the spot, just to save the event. She planned to cry and play the victim, blaming a banking error or some corrupt venue manager. She was going to make you pay for this wedding twice over." The utter ruthlessness of her scheme hung heavily in the air between us. Trey slowly turned his back on the television screen. The woman he had loved, the woman he had promised to protect for the rest of his life, was nothing more than a financial predator wearing a white dress. Madison finally collapsed to her knees on the hardwood floor, unable to support the crushing weight of her own exposed lies any longer. Her quiet sobs were the only sound left in the room, but I felt absolutely no pity for her. Stealing money was a massive betrayal on its own, but the cruelty she had inflicted upon my daughter was an entirely different kind of sin altogether. Trey stood motionless, looking down at the woman he had almost married, as if she were a venomous snake he had just discovered curled up in his own bed. Richard remained perfectly still by the door, his arms crossed, quietly observing the total deconstruction of what he now understood to be a sociopath. But I was not finished. Financial fraud proved she was a criminal. I needed Trey to understand exactly how hollow and malicious her heart truly was, all the way down. I turned back to my phone and swiped to the next file in my secure folder. The massive 75-inch screen flickered, and the financial spreadsheet vanished, replaced by a high-resolution image of an email thread. "I want you to look at one more thing, Trey," I said, my voice echoing off the marble walls of the suite. "You were led to believe Emma was removed from the wedding party because Bella's mother practically demanded the spot. Madison told you she was pressured into making the change to secure your standing at the venture capital firm. She played the helpless victim, forced into a difficult choice she never wanted to make. That was another lie." I pointed to the glowing screen. "These are emails sent directly from Madison's personal account to the wife of your boss. My corporate technology team flagged them when Madison foolishly used the unsecured guest network at our venue to orchestrate her own social climbing. Look at the dates, Trey. Madison reached out to her first. She initiated the entire exchange herself." Trey slowly lifted his head, his eyes locking onto the enlarged text on the screen. The silence was deafening as he read the words his fiancée had typed just 2 weeks earlier. But I did not want to leave any room for misinterpretation. I read the text aloud instead, making certain my mother and sister heard every single syllable of their own cruelty. "Good morning," I read, keeping my tone deliberately clinical and flat. "I know Trey values his position at the firm immensely, and we would be absolutely honored if your beautiful daughter Bella would serve as our flower girl. I currently have my niece slated for the role, but to be completely honest, she brings a lot of unnecessary baggage. Her mother is struggling financially, and frankly, they don't fit the aesthetic of the event. Having Bella walk down the aisle would elevate the entire ceremony. After all, your family are the only VIPs who matter to us. I stopped reading and let the screen shine brightly in the dim room. The word baggage hung in the air, a brutal indictment of her true character laid bare for everyone to see. Trey's face hardened into a mask of pure, absolute disgust. His family had built their entire legacy on lifting up their own community, on valuing education, hard work, and the inherent dignity of every human being. He possessed a profound respect for family ties. Hearing the woman he loved refer to an innocent 7-year-old girl as baggage, simply because she didn't fit a manufactured wealthy aesthetic, was a bridge entirely too far to cross. He looked down at Madison, who was now weeping openly, her face buried in her own hands. She could not even bring herself to look at him. She knew there was absolutely no excuse she could invent that would justify those words. The emails had laid bare her shallow, transactional nature for good. "You used my career," Trey said, his voice dangerously low, stepping away from her as if her mere proximity was physically revolting to him now. "You used my professional relationships to bully a child. You actively insulted your own niece to suck up to my boss. You threw your own sister under the bus just to make yourself look more exclusive. The utter desperation of it, the sheer ugliness of your ambition, is genuinely sickening to witness." Madison shook her head wildly, reaching a trembling hand out toward his polished shoes. "Please, Trey," she choked out. "I just wanted everything to be perfect for you. I wanted your family to be proud of me." "Do not ever use my family to justify your cruelty," Trey snapped, cutting her off instantly. "My family would never condone this. We do not discard people for an aesthetic. We do not lie to our partners, and we certainly do not steal. You do not know the first thing about what actually makes a person valuable." The dismantling of Madison was complete. Every single layer of her fake persona had been systematically stripped away, leaving nothing behind but the pathetic, greedy reality underneath it all. The financial fraud alone had destroyed the luxurious wedding, but reading those emails aloud completely destroyed any lingering fraction of love Trey might have still secretly harbored for her. He looked down at Madison, and his expression shifted from visceral anger into an absolute hollow detachment. It was the look you give a complete stranger who has just tried to pickpocket you on a crowded street. There was no warmth left in his eyes, no familiarity, and certainly no forgiveness. The man who had looked at her with such profound adoration at the rehearsal dinner just last night was simply gone now, replaced by someone else entirely. Madison felt the temperature in the room plummet. She knew she had crossed the point of no return, but her survival instinct was still entirely rooted in manipulation, even now. She let out a guttural, agonizing wail and threw her entire body forward, dropping hard onto her knees, the heavy silk of her luxury wedding gown crumpling beneath her on the polished hardwood floor. She reached up with trembling hands and grabbed Trey by his wrists, her perfectly manicured fingers digging frantically into his pristine suit cuffs. "Please, Trey," she sobbed, her chest heaving as heavy tears ruined her immaculate bridal makeup. "Please, you have to understand why I did all of this. I was so scared. I was terrified I wasn't good enough for you. Your family is so elite, so wealthy. You all grew up with absolutely everything, and I felt so incredibly small around your mother and your friends. I just wanted to be perfect for you. I bought those things to fit in, so your family wouldn't be embarrassed of me. I changed the flower girl because I thought it would help your career. I did it all out of love, Trey. I just wanted to be a wife you could be proud to show off to the world." She looked up at him, her face a mask of desperate, pathetic pleading. She was playing her final card, framing her toxic greed and pathological lying as a tragic sacrifice made in the name of love. She genuinely thought playing the insecure, overwhelmed outsider would magically trigger his protective instincts one last time. Trey did not flinch. He did not soften even slightly. He looked down at her hands, gripping his wrists with a profound, unshakable disgust. Slowly and deliberately, he reached down. He did not yank his arms away in anger. Instead, he calmly pried her fingers off his suit jacket, one by one. The physical rejection was incredibly methodical, conveying a chilling finality that screaming never could have managed. He let her hands drop back to her sides and stepped back, ensuring there was a clear, undeniable boundary between them now. "You think my family would be embarrassed if you didn't carry a luxury handbag?" Trey asked, his voice dropping to a chillingly quiet octave. "You think my mother, an appellate judge who spent 10 years as a public defender fighting for people who had absolutely nothing, cares about the brand of your shoes? You completely misunderstood everything about who we are." He stood tall, his presence dominating the room completely. "My grandfather picked cotton in Georgia," Trey said, his voice steady and sharp as shattered glass. "He worked 3 grueling jobs so my father could go to law school. My father worked 80-hour weeks so I could have the capital to start my own firm. We built our legacy on sweat, on education, and on an unbreakable foundation of personal integrity. We value character. We value honesty. We value how you treat people when they can do absolutely nothing for you in return." Madison sobbed harder, curling into herself on the floor, but Trey did not stop. His words were a surgical strike, systematically dismantling her entire worldview piece by piece. "You thought you could buy your way into our family with stolen money and designer bags," he continued. "You thought throwing your own niece in the trash to appease a corporate partner would somehow make me proud of you. That does not make you elite, Madison. That makes you completely devoid of a soul. You are a hollow, superficial shell of a person, and you are the exact opposite of everything my family stands for." The speech was devastatingly cold and utterly absolute. There was no room left for debate, and no margin left for a second chance. Trey had articulated the exact difference between true generational class and her pathetic, desperate illusion of wealth. He had exposed the rotting core of her character and held it up to the light for everyone in the room to witness firsthand. Barbara stood frozen in the corner, slowly realizing that her daughter had not just lost a wealthy husband, but had been thoroughly condemned by a man of actual substance. The veil had completely fallen, and Madison was left kneeling in the wreckage of her own catastrophic vanity. Trey did not offer her another word of explanation. The time for discussion had definitively passed. He reached up to the lapel of his custom-tailored charcoal tuxedo. Pinned to the expensive wool was a rare white orchid boutonniere, a small symbol of the lavish aesthetic Madison had desperately tried to steal for herself. Trey gripped the delicate flower and pulled it free. The sharp pin tore slightly through the fabric, but he didn't seem to care in the slightest. He dropped the orchid onto the hardwood floor, right next to Madison's trembling hands. The crisp white petals bruised instantly against the polished wood, a physical representation of their now completely dead wedding. Trey turned his back on his former fiancée entirely. He looked instead at his father, Richard, who was already checking his platinum wristwatch with the cold efficiency of a corporate general assessing the aftermath of a battle. "Tell the guests it's over," Trey said, his voice steady and carrying absolute finality. "Tell the wedding planner to dismiss the string quartet and ask the valet to start pulling the cars around. There will be no ceremony today." Richard gave a single, sharp nod. "I will handle the logistics immediately," he replied, his tone offering quiet paternal support to his son. "I will inform the family and ensure our guests depart the estate with dignity intact." He cast one final withering look at my mother, Barbara, before stepping out of the suite, leaving the heavy mahogany door cracked open behind him. Trey stood in the center of the room, taking a deep breath, as if physically clearing the toxic air from his lungs. He then turned his attention completely toward me instead. The anger that had hardened his features just moments earlier softened into an expression of profound, genuine regret. He stepped forward and extended his hand toward me. "Kelsey," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you the deepest apology. I allowed you and your daughter to be disrespected in my presence, and I was too blinded by my own assumptions to see the truth in front of me. Emma is a beautiful, bright little girl, and she never deserved to be treated like an inconvenience. I am so incredibly sorry for the pain my blindness caused your family." I reached out and shook his hand firmly. "You did not cause this pain, Trey," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but resolute. "Madison and my mother have been operating this way long before you ever entered the picture. You were just their latest target. Don't carry the weight of their deception on your shoulders." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. He looked at the heavy legal folder still resting on the marble vanity, and then back at me. "You saved my life today, Kelsey," he said, the realization settling heavily over him as he spoke. "If you hadn't stepped in, if you'd let her manipulate me into paying that venue balance, I would have tied my entire legacy to a woman who views people as disposable commodities. You risked your own peace to protect me from making the single biggest mistake of my life. I will never forget what you did for me today." "You are a good man, Trey," I told him, offering a small, sincere smile. "You deserve a partner who genuinely respects you. Go be with your family." Trey let go of my hand. He adjusted his jacket, took one final look around the opulent bridal suite, and walked out the door without ever glancing down at Madison again. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, moving further and further away until they disappeared completely into the grand foyer beyond. The moment Trey was gone, the terrifying reality of her situation hit Madison with the force of a freight train. The silence of the room was violently shattered by a high-pitched, blood-curdling shriek. Madison threw her head back and screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and absolute defeat. She slammed her fists against the hardwood floor, tearing at the expensive silk of her own wedding dress. She thrashed on the ground like a spoiled child denied a toy, entirely oblivious to the pathetic spectacle she was creating in front of everyone still present. Barbara finally moved, rushing forward to drop to her knees beside her golden child. She tried to wrap her arms around Madison, trying to shush her frantic screams, but Madison violently shoved her mother away instead. "Don't touch me!" Madison shrieked, her face red and distorted with rage. "You ruined this. You told me to use the money. You told me Trey would never find out. This is all your fault." The rapid turn of this blame game was spectacular to witness in real time. In the span of a single hour, they had gone from a united front of toxic arrogance to viciously turning on each other like cornered animals fighting over the same scraps. I stood near the doorway, observing the chaotic scene with absolute detachment. Their entire empire of lies was crumbling perfectly, right on schedule. Madison continued to wail on the floor, her hands clutching the shredded remains of her designer veil. Barbara stood over her for a few moments, looking down at the daughter she had worshipped for 29 years straight. But the look in my mother's eyes was not one of maternal concern. It was the look of a calculated investor realizing her primary asset had just plummeted to zero overnight. The wealthy venture capitalist was gone. The guaranteed access to high society, the country club memberships, the luxury vacations, all of it had vanished the second Trey walked out that door. Barbara's brain seemed to physically short-circuit as she processed the catastrophic loss of her social standing in real time. She realized instantly that tying her future to Madison was now a massive financial liability rather than an asset. So my mother did what she had always done best. She pivoted toward the nearest source of absolute power: Barbara slowly turned away from the hysterical bride, completely turning her back on the child she had relentlessly favored her entire life without a second thought. She stepped away from Madison, leaving her sobbing on the floor behind her. She smoothed the wrinkles out of her tailored emerald blazer and took a deep, steadying breath. When she looked up and met my eyes, her face underwent a transformation that was genuinely terrifying to witness up close. The vicious, sneering tyrant who had cornered me in a closet less than an hour ago had completely disappeared. In her place stood a sickeningly sweet, doting mother. A wide, artificial smile stretched across her face, reaching her eyes in a way that looked entirely unhinged. She stepped right over Madison's discarded white bouquet and walked directly toward me. "Kelsey, my brilliant, beautiful girl," Barbara cooed, her voice dripping with a syrupy, artificial affection I had never once heard directed at me in 33 years. She reached out with both hands, attempting to gently stroke my forearm. I instinctively took a sharp step back, refusing to let her physically touch me at all. She let her hands drop, but her manic smile did not falter for even a second. "I am just so incredibly proud of you," she continued, clasping her hands together against her chest. "I always knew you had it in you. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness, a chief executive officer of a massive real estate conglomerate. My own daughter. It's just spectacular, Kelsey. You've built an absolute empire right under our noses." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of her words echo in the quiet space between us. "You always knew?" I asked, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You told me I was a failure with no prospects. Just this morning, Mother, you called my entire career a joke. You physically tried to strike me because I refused to pay for imported orchids. You threatened to ruin me by bringing up a juvenile record that belongs to the sister you are currently stepping over right now." Barbara waved her hand dismissively, letting out a light, airy laugh that sounded almost genuinely surprised. "Oh, Kelsey, darling, you know how tense weddings can be." She deflected, her tone painfully fake. "People say silly things when they're incredibly stressed. I was just trying to motivate you. I always pushed you hard because I knew you were capable of this exact level of success. Look at this beautiful estate. Look at everything you own. You are the real success story of this family. We don't need Trey or his incredibly snobby parents. We never needed them anyway." She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The mask of the loving mother slipped just enough to reveal the raw, predatory greed shining underneath in her eyes. "Madison made a terrible mistake," she murmured, gesturing vaguely toward the sobbing woman on the floor. "But she is still your sister. And I am still your mother, Kelsey. We are blood. You have so much wealth now, more money than we could ever spend in a lifetime. You can take care of us. You can pay off this venue invoice today and handle Madison's credit card debt, so the police don't get involved. We can keep this all in the family quietly. You can even move us into one of your luxury properties. We don't need wealthy outsiders to elevate us anymore. You can take care of your mother and sister now, right?" She tilted her head, looking at me with wide, expectant eyes, waiting for the answer she assumed was already coming. She truly believed that appealing to my sense of familial duty would suddenly erase an entire lifetime of cruelty in a single conversation. She thought my financial success was simply a new bank account for her to quietly drain, one favor at a time. She smiled, waiting patiently for me to eagerly accept the role of the family savior she had just assigned me without asking. But she was about to learn that even my wealth had firm boundaries around it. I stepped back from her outstretched hands, feeling an absolute physical repulsion wash over me from head to toe. She stood there wearing that grotesque, artificial smile, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook and save her from the consequences of her own actions once again. "No, Barbara," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that finally wiped the smile clean off her face. I am not taking care of you or Madison. I will not pay this venue invoice, and I will not pay off her credit card debt. And I am not moving either of you into any of my properties. My wealth belongs to me and my daughter alone. You do not get to torture me for 33 years and then demand the fruits of my labor just because your golden child bankrupted your entire social standing. Barbara let her hands fall to her sides, her jaw tightening visibly as the loving mother facade began to crack apart at the seams. Kelsey, be reasonable, she pleaded, her voice taking on that familiar sharp edge again. You cannot just abandon your own family. We are in a desperate situation here. You have the resources to fix this instantly. If you just handle this crisis, we can all move forward together. I will even apologize for what I said in the closet earlier. You really think this is just about today? I asked, shaking my head slowly. You think this is just about imported orchids and one bounce check? You have spent my entire life using me as a shield to absorb the impact of Madison's reckless behavior. But you made a fatal error somewhere along the way. You assumed I was ignorant. You assumed that because I walked away and quietly built my own life, I never once looked back at the financial wreckage you left behind in my name. I turned slightly and signaled to Attorney Pierce, who had remained silently observing the exchange from the side of the room. He stepped forward, opening his heavy leather briefcase once more. He pulled out a single manila envelope and handed it directly to me. I held it up so my mother could see the bright red urgent stamp printed across the front. When Lux Group started acquiring major commercial real estate, I needed to ensure my personal financial portfolio was absolutely flawless, I explained, holding her gaze steadily. I had my legal team conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of my entire credit history, dating all the way back to the day I turned 18. I wanted to make sure there were no lingering discrepancies left over from my youth. Barbara's face went completely slack. The color drained from her cheeks even faster than when Mr. Montgomery had first announced the bounced check earlier that morning. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward, her eyes locked onto the manila envelope as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike at her throat. Do you want to guess what my legal team found during that audit, Mother? I asked, stepping forward and closing the physical distance she had just created between us. They found a second mortgage. A very large, high-interest second mortgage, taken out on the house you are currently living in. The loan was initiated exactly 6 years ago. It was the exact same year Madison decided she absolutely needed to spend a year studying fashion in Paris, and you suddenly had the cash available to fund her extravagant lifestyle. Barbara opened her mouth, but she could not produce a single sound. Her chest heaved as she struggled to draw enough air into her lungs. The bank records show that you needed a co-signer to secure that loan, because your own credit was already overextended at the time, I continued, my voice relentless and sharp. And since Madison had no income of her own, you decided to use me instead. But you didn't ask me. You knew I would say no. So you forged my signature on the federal loan documents. You committed identity theft against your own daughter, just to finance a luxury vacation for your favorite child. Please, Kelsey, she managed to whisper, her voice trembling badly now. Please keep your voice down. Someone will hear you. I do not care who hears me, I stated firmly. I tossed the manila envelope onto the vanity table. It landed with a soft thud, right next to Madison's discarded makeup brushes. Here is the reality of your situation, Barbara. I am giving you exactly 30 days to pay off the entire remaining balance of that fraudulent mortgage. You will remove my name from that debt completely. If you fail to do so by that deadline, I am instructing Attorney Pierce to contact the authorities directly. I will press felony fraud charges against you personally. The words hung in the air with the weight of a judge rendering a final verdict. Barbara stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water and left gasping on the deck. The sheer terror of facing federal prison finally shattered the last remaining fragments of her arrogant delusion. Her knees buckled completely. She collapsed heavily into the velvet vanity chair behind her, knocking over a bottle of expensive perfume in the process. It shattered on the marble floor, filling the room with an overpowering, suffocating floral scent that seemed to cling to everything. She began hyperventilating, her hands clutching her chest as her perfectly styled hair clung to her damp forehead. She was experiencing a full-blown panic attack, finally realizing that her lifelong strategy of using me as a disposable resource had just triggered her own absolute financial and legal ruin. She had nowhere left to hide, and no one left to manipulate. Madison, who was still kneeling on the floor nearby, watched our mother collapse in horror. For her entire life, Barbara had been the ultimate safety net, the woman who would fix every mistake and fund every extravagant whim, regardless of the cost to anyone else. Seeing the matriarch of the family completely neutralized and facing felony charges herself finally broke through Madison's thick layer of self-absorption. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she was entirely alone. There would be no secret bailouts today. There would be no more forged mortgages left to cover her tracks. Before Madison could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, Attorney Pierce stepped forward once more. He reached into his briefcase for a final time. He did not pull out a thick folder this time. He produced a single, crisp sheet of paper bearing the official letterhead of Lux Group. He walked over to Madison, looking down at her ruined wedding dress and tear-streaked face with absolute professional indifference. He extended his arm, holding the paper out toward her. Madison stared at it, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the edge of the document. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming earlier. "That is an itemized invoice," Attorney Pierce explained, his voice echoing coldly through the destroyed suite. "It details the $25,000 in non-refundable labor costs incurred by the estate staff this morning. It covers the culinary preparation, the floral arrangements that had to be dismantled, and the hourly wages of the event coordinators who spent their morning trying to salvage a wedding funded by a forged check." Madison looked at the bottom line of the invoice, her eyes widening in fresh terror. "I cannot pay this," she gasped, dropping the paper onto the hardwood floor. "I have absolutely nothing left. You saw the bank statements. Trey took his money back. My credit cards are completely maxed out. I do not have $25,000. Attorney Pierce adjusted his cuffs, his expression completely devoid of any pity whatsoever. "That is incredibly unfortunate for you, Madison," he replied smoothly. "But, since the funds provided by the groom were proven to be entirely fraudulent, the financial liability falls squarely on the individual who signed the vendor contracts. You signed those agreements. Therefore, you are personally liable for this invoice." He took a step back, aligning himself perfectly with me once again. "We expect full payment within 14 business days," Pierce continued, his tone sharp and entirely uncompromising. "If the balance is not settled by that date, Lux Group will immediately file a lawsuit against you in civil court. We will garnish whatever minimum wages you manage to earn, and we will place liens on any future assets you acquire. We will ensure this debt follows you for the rest of your natural life." The devastation was absolute. The room, which had been a hub of arrogant luxury just 2 hours earlier, now felt like nothing more than a tomb. Mother and sister were completely trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Barbara was gasping for air in the vanity chair, facing the terrifying prospect of a criminal trial and the loss of her own home. Madison was shivering on the floor, buried under a mountain of credit card debt, a pending civil lawsuit, and the public humiliation of a canceled high society wedding. They had tried to destroy my peace in order to elevate their own status. Instead, they had systematically dismantled their own lives, piece by piece. They were financially ruined, legally cornered, and socially exiled, all in the span of a single afternoon. I looked at the two women who shared my blood, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of closure settle over me. The toxic cycle was finally, permanently broken. I did not need to raise my voice or throw a tantrum to achieve this ultimate victory. The truth, combined with unyielding personal boundaries, had proven to be the most destructive weapon I could possibly wield. They had built a fragile house of cards, and I had simply turned and walked away. I did not wait for my mother to formulate another plea, or for my sister to conjure another excuse. I simply turned my back on both of them. The heavy mahogany door of the bridal suite stood wide open, and I walked toward it, my posture perfectly straight. Behind me, the wailing continued, a desperate, pathetic symphony of two women realizing their reign of manipulation was permanently over. My heels clicked cleanly and rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. Each step felt incredibly light, as if I were physically walking out of the emotional prison they had kept me locked inside for 33 years. Attorney Pierce followed closely behind me, his leather briefcase secured at his side. He pulled the massive suite door shut behind us with a heavy click, severing the chaotic noise of their financial ruin from the peaceful reality of my own world. The corridor outside was a stark contrast to the destruction unfolding inside the room. Several venue employees were standing near the grand staircase, murmuring quietly among themselves as they awaited further instructions regarding the cancelled event. When they saw me approach, they immediately straightened their posture, recognizing the chief executive officer of their own company. I offered them a polite, reassuring smile as I passed. Mr. Montgomery, the financial director, stepped forward from the group, holding his clipboard against his chest. "The catering staff is standing by for your directive, Miss Kelsey," he said, his tone entirely professional. "Pack up the perishable food and donate it to the local women's shelter downtown," I instructed, without breaking my stride even slightly. "Pay the staff their full wages for the day, and then send everyone home early. The event is officially terminated." Mr. Montgomery nodded briskly, stepping aside to let me pass. It was incredibly empowering to reclaim my space and my authority in that moment, navigating the sprawling mansion not as a marginalized family outcast, but as the absolute architect of my own domain. I bypassed the main lobby, where confused guests were already being directed toward their vehicles by Richard. Instead, I took the side exit, pushing open the glass French doors that led to the private garden attached to the bridal suite wing. The crisp afternoon air instantly washed over me, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. The sun was shining brightly, entirely indifferent to the dark storm that had just decimated my family inside those walls. Sitting on a wrought iron bench beneath the shade of a massive willow tree was my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She was swinging her legs happily, entirely insulated from the toxic explosion that had just occurred a few rooms away. Beside her sat my loyal executive assistant, Carmen. Carmen was a fierce, competent woman who had helped me build Lux Group from the ground up, year after year. She was holding a small pink bakery box while Emma happily ate a chocolate pastry beside her. When Emma saw me walking across the manicured lawn, her face lit up with absolute pure joy. "Mommy," she called out, dropping the last piece of her pastry back into the box and hopping off the bench. She ran across the grass toward me, her custom blush pink dress billowing gently around her legs. I knelt down and caught her in my arms, hugging her tightly against me. She smelled like chocolate and sunshine. "Are we going to the wedding now, Mommy?" she asked, her bright eyes looking up at me with innocent curiosity. I smoothed a stray curl away from her forehead and smiled. "No, sweetheart," I told her softly. There's no wedding today. The party got canceled, but we're going to go do something much better instead. We're going to take a drive to the beach and get whatever you want for dinner. Emma cheered excitedly, entirely unfazed by the sudden change of plans. To her, a day at the beach was infinitely better than standing quietly in a stuffy reception hall for hours. I stood up and looked at Carmen, offering her a nod of profound gratitude. "Thank you for keeping her entertained, Carmen," I said. "You know I always have your back, Kelsey," Carmen replied, offering a warm, knowing smile in return. My black armored SUV was already idling at the edge of the garden driveway, the driver standing patiently by the open rear door. I took Emma's tiny hand in mine, and we walked together across the stone pathway, leaving the massive French chateau-style mansion behind us for good. I did not cast a single glance over my shoulder. I did not wonder what my mother was doing back there, or how my sister was going to survive her catastrophic new debt. Their problems were no longer my burden to carry. Not anymore. We climbed into the luxurious, quiet interior of the vehicle, and the driver shut the door behind us, closing us off completely from the world outside. As the SUV glided smoothly down the long gravel driveway, moving further and further away from the estate, I looked over at my daughter. She was already leaning her head against the leather seat, her eyes heavy with the sweet exhaustion of a perfect afternoon. The chaos of the estate, the screaming, the broken glass, the sheer toxic panic of my mother and sister, it all faded into the background like a bad movie playing on a muted television somewhere far away. We were finally, completely free. 6 months have passed since that sunny afternoon. Half a year since the grand illusion my family had built for decades finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely of their own making. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy them further. I simply removed my financial protection and let reality do the rest of the work on its own. Madison learned a very harsh lesson about how the real world operates without my silent safety net or my personal bank account standing behind her. Lux Group followed through on our civil suit regarding the venue's labor costs. Combined with the massive credit card debt she had secretly accumulated for her fake luxury lifestyle, she was forced into complete financial ruin within a matter of months. The courts did not absolve her of the restitution she owed my company, given the deliberate, fraudulent nature of her actions from the very start. Today, the woman who sneered at my career, who demanded imported orchids and called my daughter baggage to her face, is working a minimum-wage retail job at a mid-tier suburban department store. She spends her long days folding discounted sweaters, standing on her feet for 8-hour shifts, and taking sharp orders from teenage assistant managers half her age. Her meager wages are aggressively garnished every single week, slowly chipping away at the mountain of debt she still owes. The wealthy bridesmaids she once bought with stolen money vanished the moment her platinum credit cards were declined for good. She lives now in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, entirely cut off from the high society she sacrificed her soul to try to join. There are no more Maldives vacations, no more designer handbags. There is only the exhausting reality of the life she actually earned for herself. My mother, Barbara, did not fare any better in the end. When the 30-day deadline on the fraudulent mortgage approached, she realized I was absolutely serious about pressing federal charges against her. Attorney Pierce made it crystal clear to her legal counsel that identity theft and wire fraud carried mandatory prison sentences under federal law. To avoid spending her twilight years in a federal penitentiary, Barbara was forced to liquidate her only remaining asset. She had to sell the sprawling suburban house she had prized above almost everything else in her life. Because she had to sell it quickly, in a distressed state, just to meet the deadline, she took a massive financial loss on the sale. After paying off the forged loan, the accumulated high interest and the real estate fees, she was left with practically nothing to her name. She now rents a small, outdated one-bedroom apartment in a distinctly working-class neighborhood, far away from the elite zip codes she used to brag about at every opportunity. The local country club permanently revoked her membership due to unpaid dues and the massive public scandal surrounding the canceled wedding. Her entire social circle abandoned her completely, treating her like a pariah overnight. She has tried to call me dozens of times since then, from various unlisted numbers, crying and begging for a second chance or just a small loan. I block every single one. She made her bed, and now she has to sleep in it alone, without me. Trey handled the destruction of his own wedding with exactly the kind of quiet, dignified grace I had expected from a man of his caliber. He did not seek public revenge, or drag the situation out through the press for sympathy. He simply severed all ties with Madison completely and moved forward with his life. About 3 weeks after the canceled ceremony, a package arrived at my corporate headquarters. It wasn't addressed to me, but to Emma instead. Inside was a beautiful, handcrafted wooden dollhouse, age-appropriate, thoughtful, and entirely devoid of any pretentious luxury branding whatsoever. Tucked inside the roof was a handwritten letter addressed to me, written on premium stationery. Trey wrote a message of profound, genuine gratitude. He thanked me once again for having the courage to expose the truth and for saving him from a disastrous marriage before it was too late. He mentioned that he had accepted a senior partnership promotion within his venture capital firm and was permanently relocating to their London office to start a brand new chapter abroad. He wished Emma and me a lifetime of happiness and peace. It was the perfect closure from a genuinely good man who had simply gotten caught in my family's toxic web through no fault of his own. As for me, I am exactly where I was always meant to be. Lux Group has continued to expand steadily, acquiring 3 more premier hospitality properties across the coastline in the month since. My business thrives because it is built on a foundation of integrity, hard work, and absolute transparency, none of which my mother or sister ever understood or valued for a single day of their lives. But more importantly, my home thrives too. Emma is flourishing in her second-grade class, entirely unaware of the bullet we dodged together that afternoon. We spend our weekends baking cookies, visiting science museums, and walking along the beach near our home. There is no more walking on eggshells in our house. There is no more shrinking myself to make insecure people feel taller than they actually are. The heavy, suffocating burden of trying to earn the love of a mother and sister who only ever saw me as an exploitable resource has been permanently lifted from my shoulders, once and for all. Sometimes you have to let the bridge burn completely to realize you never actually needed to cross it in the first place. I built my own empire while they were busy playing pretend inside a fragile house of cards. They chose their path of deception, and I chose my path of truth. And as I sit here now, looking out at the ocean from the balcony of my own estate, watching my daughter play happily in the sun, I can honestly say I have never been happier in my entire life. The past is finally behind us, and the future is beautifully, entirely ours to build. I sit here now at my polished mahogany desk in the corner office of the Lux Group headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a sweeping, panoramic view of the city skyline, a sprawling testament to what can be built when you finally stop letting other people tear you down piece by piece. The thick glass is entirely soundproof, keeping the chaotic noise of the traffic far below at bay. It is a physical barrier that perfectly mirrors the emotional boundaries I finally learned to construct for myself, brick by brick. I look down at the bustling streets, watching the tiny cars move in endless, patient lines, and I feel an overwhelming sense of profound gratitude wash over me. For 33 years, I believed the absolute lie that society forcefully shoves down our throats from the moment we're born. Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water. You have to forgive them because they're your parents or your siblings, no matter what they do to you. I let those empty platitudes keep me chained to a mother who viewed me strictly as a disposable shield, and a sister who viewed me as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone. I absorbed their cruelty, their endless financial manipulation, and their sharp, passive-aggressive insults because I genuinely believed it was my duty as a daughter and a sister. I operated under the tragic delusion that if I just worked a little harder, accommodated them a little more, or sacrificed enough of my own happiness along the way, they would eventually love me the way they loved each other. But the harsh, undeniable reality is that blood does not equal loyalty. Sharing a matching genetic code with someone does not give them an automatic, lifelong VIP pass to disrespect you. It does not grant them some kind of divine license to exploit your hard-earned resources or to belittle your innocent children in the process. As a society, we are taught to be fiercely protective of our peace when it comes to strangers, bad dates, or toxic friendships that no longer serve us. But we are somehow conditioned to tolerate absolute emotional terrorism, so long as it comes from someone who happens to share our last name. That, I've come to believe, is the most dangerous psychological scam in the entire world. Walking away from my mother and my sister was not a sudden act of malice or some bitter attempt at revenge. It was the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation, plain and simple. The moment I finally stopped carrying the crushing, suffocating weight of their impossible expectations, my entire life expanded rapidly in every direction. The immense mental energy I used to waste trying to anticipate Barbara's volatile mood swings or mitigate Madison's catastrophic, selfish mistakes is now poured entirely into my business and my daughter instead. My company's revenue has doubled in the last 6 months alone. But more importantly, my personal peace of mind has multiplied 1,000 times over in that same period. There is a profound, beautiful quiet that settles over your life when you permanently stop engaging with toxic people altogether. At first, that quiet feels almost terrifying. You expect the other shoe to drop at any moment. You wait anxiously for the frantic phone calls, the expertly crafted guilt trips, the manufactured dramatic emergencies designed to pull you back in. But when you stand firm, when you refuse to pick up the phone, open the door, or write the check, that initial anxiety slowly transforms into a profound, unshakable peace, unlike anything I'd felt before. I do not flinch when my phone rings anymore. I do not spend my holidays walking on eggshells, trying to maintain a fragile, artificial peace that was never real to begin with. Emma notices the difference too. Children are incredibly perceptive barometers of our internal emotional states, whether we realize it or not. She no longer sees a mother who is exhausted, defensive, and constantly on edge. She sees a woman who is grounded, confident, and entirely present in every single moment they share together. We laugh louder now. We sleep better. Our home is a true sanctuary, not a tactical battlefield to be navigated carefully every single day. I successfully broke the generational curse of manipulation and emotional abuse, so that Emma will never have to know what it feels like to constantly earn her place inside her own family. She will grow up knowing that love is supposed to be safe, unconditional, and respectful. Always. She will know that firm boundaries are not cruel punishments, but basic, non-negotiable requirements for any healthy relationship worth having. If you are listening to this right now, and you are bone-tired from trying to appease people who are actively committed to misunderstanding you, no matter what you do, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to aggressively protect your peace, your finances, and your children from anyone who threatens them, regardless of their official title in your family tree. You do not owe your abusers your presence simply because you happen to share a biological history with them. Grieving the supportive family you truly deserved is a deeply painful process. There's no way around that. But it is infinitely better than sacrificing your own sanity to serve the toxic family you actually got instead. Do not ever let anyone guilt trip you into tolerating abuse under the guise of family loyalty. Build your empire, protect your peace, and never apologize for outgrowing the people who desperately tried to keep you small your entire life. The view from the top is incredibly beautiful once you finally drop the heavy baggage that was holding you down for so long. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below.